Okay, I'm joined today by Holly Rubenstein from the Travel Diaries. Hello, Holly, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on.
No problem, it's an absolute pleasure. I first listened to your podcast, I think it was just before everything went crazy, when people were still traveling the world and living out their dreams and going to far flung destinations. Um, and I've actually listened to it quite a lot since because it gives you that little bit of escapism that I'm sure a lot of us have been in need of over the last year or so. But for anybody who
Mm.
hasn't heard the podcast, um, could you start off, please, Holly, by telling us what it is and how it came about?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like you said, it's definitely been a podcast for armchair travel and escapism
Hmm.
during these crazy over 12 months now. But my podcast is the Travel Diaries, and I'm the creator, presenter, and producer of it. And each week I speak to a special guest. It's either a celebrity name or a really important name in travel about the travel experiences and destinations that have shaped their lives. And we cover 7 chapters each episode. They're always the same, starting with their earliest childhood travel memory, going through to their all-time favorite destination, their hidden gem, and what's at the top of their travel bucket list. And in doing so, it's amazing how travel really punctuates people's lives.
Mm.
People really remember their travels more than the kind of blur of everyday life when they're at home. And so, in doing so, we really uncover a lot about the guest, which is how we really get to know them.
Yeah, perfect. And how did you decide that you wanted to start a podcast?
Well, I was obsessed with podcasts first and foremost. I was a real big podcast consumer and a podcast fan,
Hmm.
and I had two kind of major journalistic interests. I am a journalist, and I was working across entertainment and travel, doing red carpet reporting, interviewing A-listers on the red carpet at premieres, and doing film junkets, but also travel writing. And when I was doing these interviews with people like George Clooney and Tom Hanks,
Mm.
I found myself sometimes seeing their eyes glaze over a little bit, being like, oh, I have to answer this question again. There are the same questions that they're asked. And I thought, God, I'd really just love to ask them where, their favorite luxury hotel is, or
Mm.
the place where they learned the most about themselves while they were traveling, because they've all traveled the world. And so that's how the concept was born, and I just decided to make it happen. And my first interview was with Richard Branson in San Francisco, and it all kind of unfurled from there.
Fantastic. So, Richard Branson as the first guest is a pretty good start. You know, a lot of podcasters these days, well, I mean, the sort of hobbyists will start with their best mate. But obviously, if you have a bit of profile, if you've got connections, then it's always good to start with somebody big. So that's a great start. But could you give us an idea of some of the other guests you've had? Because you've had some wonderful names.
Yeah, well, oh, picking a few to talk about is so hard. I've had 51 episodes
Yeah.
now, and they're all, they all mean so much to me. I've had a lot of foodie guests. Food is so intrinsically linked with travel, and
Mm.
travel is so intrinsically linked with food. So actually, in my later season, season 4, my season finale guest was Heston Blumenthal, and that was definitely one of my favorite episodes because he really, well, firstly, it's got the most response out of any episode I've released so far from the
Right.
listeners.
Okay.
He's definitely encouraged people to think differently about life. So we talk about his travels. He's just moved to France, but we also cover the meaning of life,
Hmm.
quantum physics. He's a real genius. So that was really exciting. And Rick Stein was another real popular foodie guest, and
Yeah.
talking about Cornwall, he's so evocative. And then I've had some real big kind of classic names like Sir Michael Palin. That probably was my most exciting guest that I've had for me as like a real kind of personal, like pinch myself moment.
Yeah, I bet.
He was for the listeners, he's obviously a real stalwart in like in travel and entertainment and across all these different elements. He's such a multifaceted guy, and he was actually pretty much the first person I saw after the first intense lockdown.
Mm, okay.
He invited me to his house in London to record it.
That
So
must have been
that
very
was
surreal. You haven't
it
seen
was
anybody
so
for
weird.
ages, and then you're
Yeah.
seeing somebody from Monty Python. And
Yeah,
yeah.
it was crazy. I arrived just as his Sainsbury's shop was arriving, and I was like, "This guy is so cool." Honestly, he was so laid back and nice. And then, if I was to perhaps say one episode, if you haven't listened to the podcast, one to kind of get you into it,
Mm.
Simon Reeve is an episode that I really enjoyed because it really kind of encapsulates what the podcast is all about. He's been to 140 countries, so I mean unbelievably well traveled, but he gets under the skin of the country, really brings out so many individual elements, the socio-political, the moral, the ethical elements of traveling to life. And also we learn so much more about him than you might already know, and his story is so fascinating, up to the point where he got on to travel and TV. He was an investigative journalist prior to that, and so yeah, those are some of my very favorites.
Yeah, this is a great list. I was a big fan of the Michael Palin episode, wrote about it for Pod Bible. It was in one of the
Thank
magazines. I
you.
can't remember which one it
That was
was.
so wonderful. Yeah, I was so excited when I saw that.
Yes. And then another one that I've enjoyed fairly recently, even though you recorded it a while back, was the Ed Stafford one.
Oh yeah, I'm
Because,
a huge Ed Stafford fan.
yes, in the first lockdown, I binge watched all of his TV shows.
Did
Um,
you?
and they were absolutely amazing. The first one where he spends 90 days on, I can't remember the name of the island, but that was just such an amazing show. Was it
The Fijian island, yeah.
Naked and Afraid or Naked? I
Yep.
think something like that. So yeah,
Yeah, Naked and Afraid, yeah.
fascinating conversation that was on your podcast, and I ended up going on to listen to episodes that he's been on with Russell Brand and a few other podcasts. I'm a big fan of his, so that's a personal recommendation from me to go and check out that episode of the Travel Diaries. Um, I wonder, something I've thought about in the past while listening to the show. Obviously, when you listen to a lot of podcasts, things like Films to Be Buried With, where you'll listen, somebody will recommend a film and you'll go, okay, I must watch that, and you put it on your list. Or you listen to Off Menu and somebody mentions a restaurant or a dish and you think, I've got to try that, I might cook that. Do you spend most of your life adding new destinations and new cities and new places that you have now decided you have to go to after speaking to
Yes.
your guests?
I do. I actually add every place I want to visit to a Google map. So I save them.
Perfect.
I've got now nearly 1,600 places saved.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I've got kind of a lifetime's worth of travel there to tick off. And no, it's one of the best parts about the podcast. I get so inspired, get so many different tips. I love getting people's hidden gems. That's one of the chapters. I
Hmm.
love the hidden gems because you really get to get these secret spots that you've never heard of, and when you then go to that destination, it's just, you could be like, yeah, and it's inspired the listeners to travel too, which is great.
I bet. Yeah, certainly. There's lots of places I'm very keen to try and go to. And I like the fact that, especially, even with Rick Stein's episode, you're speaking to some people who are suggesting places very far away, or it's going to cost an awful lot of money to get there and to stay in the resorts or wherever they ended up going. But with Rick Stein, it's just a trip down to Cornwall.
Yeah, exactly. And it's amazing how many people's, well, it isn't amazing, it's lovely how many people's destination choices are in
Hmm.
the UK. The majority of my guests are British, and so when they give tips for British destinations, I'm always adding them to my list. In fact, I'm going down to a place that Hugh Fernley Whittingstall recommended in a couple of weeks in Torquay.
Perfect.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. And plans moving forward? Obviously, we've been stuck in the middle of this situation whereby we've had to start recording a lot of this stuff remotely, and I'm sure you
Hmm.
found it the same as me. In a way, it sort of opened up a load of guests that perhaps wouldn't have wanted to have got the tube into London and come to a studio. Um, I'm sure you're looking forward to meeting people face to face again,
I am.
but you're going to
I
continue
am.
recording remotely and maybe speaking to people further afield.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly I didn't even consider recording remotely for the first couple of seasons.
Mm,
And when people asked me, I just said no, which was very small minded of me, I think. But I was scared of the technology actually. And, I didn't,
yeah.
it's just me. I don't have a producer. So it was, yeah. I still feel, I don't know about you, but I still kind of feel nauseatingly sick every time I kind of click end record, when I just like,
Yeah.
please make sure it's recorded. But that can happen when you're in real life too. The first episode that I'm recording for season 5, which is coming out in the summer, I am doing in real life.
Wow. Okay.
Which is exciting, after May the 17th, when we can do that in real life. But yeah, I'm excited about the prospect, like Gregory Porter, who was on this last season, speaking to him from his living room in California. Pretty cool. And it's great that we can do that.
Yeah, certainly is. Brilliant. Okay, cool. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that we need to cover, Holly. If anybody hasn't listened to the podcast, and I think they've probably got a pretty good idea of what it's all about. Some listeners, I'm sure, who are aware of the podcast might be desperate to know where you are going to go first. When you're allowed to jump on a plane and go on holiday, is there like a place where you go every year that you really need to get to, or are you going to try and tick off one of those boxes on your Google Maps list?
Do you know what, the first place that I'm going to, I'm actually not going to be jumping on a plane. So I'm going to be jumping on a train and going to Scotland, doing a road trip through the Highlands of Scotland.
Lovely.
A part of the world that is mentioned so many times on the podcast. It's landscape, it's scenery, and I will be definitely ticking off quite a few places that have been mentioned. So I'm really excited for that. I hope the sun shines.
Yes, I'm sure.
That's the only risk with Scotland, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's true. Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much, Holly, for coming on. And hopefully a lot of our listeners will now be tuning in to check out the Travel Diaries.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.